El día de ayer tuvimos el lanzamiento oficial del UFM Law Liberty Circle aquí en la Universidad Francisco Marroquín, incluso en este espacio del COLAP. Y la idea de nuestro, creo yo, primer evento, ¿no? Con abogados, profesores de Derecho y algunos miembros del claustro, otros exalumnos, es hablar un poco brevemente sobre el UFM Law and Liberty Circle. Para ello lo que vamos a hacer es tomarnos unos breves minutos para contextualizarles a ustedes en qué consiste el proyecto y luego que termine yo esa muy breve contextualización, le voy a dar la palabra a uno de nuestros invitados especiales, que es el profesor Alan Mendenhall, que está aquí con nosotros, a quien le damos las gracias y a quien también ayer participó en el lanzamiento oficial. Antes, también les comento que me voy a dedicar solo unos breves minutos para decir por qué el UFM Law and Liberty Circle, en qué consiste este proyecto. El UFM Law and Liberty Circle nace básicamente a tenor de una propuesta que le ve al Consejo Directivo y que aquí está además el rector de la universidad, el licenciado Ricardo Castillo Arenales, quien le dio mucho apoyo. Nació básicamente de la convicción de la conmemoración que se hizo en la universidad de los 50 años de la universidad y en la cual las autoridades de la universidad nos pusieron a leer los documentos fundacionales de la universidad. En esos documentos fundacionales de la universidad están las memorias de nuestro fundador Manuel Ayao y en esas memorias se hacen varios énfasis importantes en lo que es el área del derecho propiamente. Entonces, la importancia de enfocarse en la teoría del derecho, decía Manuel Ayao, que esto es importante, importantísimo, consideraba que no debía desviarse los estudios de derecho a enfoques sociológicos, sino básicamente de análisis jurídico, centrado evidentemente en la legislación, en el derecho positivo, incluso llega a decir, no niega la importancia de ese derecho positivo, pero que ese derecho positivo sea analizado a la luz de una teoría del derecho sólida. Esto me puso a pensar, muchos esfuerzos se han hecho en la universidad sobre esto y se seguirán haciendo. Y además, Manuel Ayao también habla de la importancia que tiene la defensa de esos principios en el ámbito jurídico, cónsonos con la libertad occidental y los principios liberales. Eso me puso a pensar bastante, sobre todo porque la universidad tiene históricos alianzas, convenios, relaciones con muchas universidades, centros de pensamiento y tanques de pensamiento en los Estados Unidos. Y uno de esos importantes organizaciones en los Estados Unidos, en materia legal principalmente, es the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society, ya lo explicará mejor nuestro querido profesor Alan Mendenhall, cómo nació, pero básicamente es una importante organización en el mundo del derecho, sobre el cual tenía ideas de lo que hacen en Estados Unidos, pero no tenía idea de que estaban yendo también fuera de los Estados Unidos. Cuando esa idea la exploré, aquí a modo de esta reunión informal con ustedes, tuve que volver a leer los documentos fundacionales para ver si mi idea era correcta. Y entonces aprecié que también había una especie como de anticipo de originalismo en las memorias de Manuel Ayao, porque él de alguna forma refiere la importancia que tiene la intención original de los fiduciarios fundadores en el mantenimiento del espíritu de esta universidad, lo que él llama el original intent. Hoy en día, como explicará también el profesor Mendenhall, el originalismo no se basa en el original intent, pero me pareció que había algo allí interesante. Luego me puse a explorar cuáles eran las relaciones con los abogados, específicamente de la universidad, con organizaciones de ese tipo. Y me percaté también que los dos únicos doctores honoris causa en materia de derecho, principalmente, son dos connotados juristas americanos, norteamericanos, que tuvieron mucha relación con the Federalist Society. Uno es Henry Manny, que tuvo mucha relación en el ámbito económico, y el otro es Edwin Meese, que fue fiscal en la época de Reagan y es uno de los más distinguidos miembros también de Federalist Society, Ed Meese. Entonces, frente a eso, dijimos, bueno, vamos a ver la posibilidad de hacer esta alianza estratégica de asociación con The Federalist Society, y surgió la idea en un API Conference en Las Vegas, en donde en una noche estábamos hablando con el profesor Mendenhall y otros, y yo le dije esta idea. El profesor Mendenhall le pareció extraordinaria, mandó un correo, no sé si en la madrugada, y 5 horas después tuve una respuesta de uno de sus mayores jefes, el profesor Jim Kelly III, creo que es. Y lo que me llamó la atención es que el profesor a las 5 horas lo que me dice es: he revisado la página de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín y estoy en shock porque las relaciones son muy estrechas. La misión que ustedes tienen es importante. Y yo también veía en el YouTube del profesor del canal que tenía videos, algunos incluso de la Marroquín, por cierto, y otros evidentemente autores como Schumpeter, Hayek, Mises y abogados evidentemente de los Estados Unidos. Entonces, frente a eso, lo exploramos evidentemente con las autoridades. Esto es una muestra de que las autoridades apoyaron el proyecto. Ayer tuvimos ese lanzamiento oficial y lo que esperamos es crear un espacio en Guatemala, además de lo que ya hace la Facultad de Derecho, lo que puede hacer estudios políticos, lo que pueden hacer muchas facultades que están metidos también en el área del derecho, incluso la Escuela de Negocios en la universidad, pero un espacio en el que graduados, profesores, estudiantes, nos enfoquemos fuertemente en la importancia que tiene el derecho. Y el reto que tiene evidentemente el derecho en América Latina, ya lo sabemos todos, quizás los que están aquí, quizás en la parte de preguntas y respuestas. Esto se puede profundizar mucho de cuáles son las áreas, pero hay 3 ejes verticales. Una académica, por así decirlo, seminarios, discusiones de libros. Vamos a tener invitados extranjeros que van a venir a hablar acá, invitados nacionales que van a exponer. Vamos a explorar todas las áreas del derecho, no solo el derecho público, derecho privado, ¿no? Es importantísimo. Y aparte de eso, deberíamos tener también relaciones de darnos cuenta de qué es lo que está de alguna forma aconteciendo académicamente, ¿no? En nuestros países. Y sobre todo, explorar también, consono con el ideario de la universidad, todo lo que han sido los grandes pensadores liberales y lo que han aportado en el ámbito del derecho, con una intención adicional a lo que se puede hacer en las facultades de Derecho, en la Facultad de Derecho, y con la intención también de crear un espacio de discusión, de debate. Si lo ven como un club más de la universidad, nos damos por satisfechos, porque hay muchos clubs. Y yo creo que el reto que hay mayormente en Guatemala y en América Latina es congregar a personas como ustedes que puedan aceptar esta invitación a las 7 de la mañana, ¿no? Tempranamente, venir a hablar, venir a discutir y que esto se consolide en el tiempo, que haya ese engagement de la asociación. Bueno, le doy las gracias, le voy a dar la palabra brevemente a la vicepresidenta, la vicerrectora Lynn O'Reilly, que nos va a hablar sobre el ILLS.
It was a pleasure to help coordinate Alan's visit because this was a really rapid, exciting thing that happened just since the spring. I had the opportunity to visit with the International Law and Liberty Society in May. They had a conference in London. They have an annual conference every year. And there are now 18 groups around the world that they're supporting through bringing speakers to address these questions of law. Yesterday, when I spoke to the students, I asked them some questions, and I said, what's the difference between a democracy and a republic, and why does it matter? What's the relationship of law and legislation? These are great questions that students need to be thinking about. When I read the philosophy statement of UFM, I've always been inspired by the statement that we have to understand the theory of our discipline as well as just the practice and the technique of our discipline, but we really do have to understand what our discipline means. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a historian, but I study a lot about the history of law. And I think that the International Law and Liberty Society was exciting to see because they're really mainly very young lawyers who are seeing this need to talk about the law and what it means all around the world, and that we face similar problems in different contexts. So it's important for us to think about broadly, what is the law? And how do we address the operationalization and the contestation and all of these things in different contexts? Because we have jurisprudential context, we have political context, we have international law context in particular that are increasingly, I think, weighing on many, many countries, especially in places like Guatemala, who are subject to a lot of the UN industrial complex. So all of these questions to me are extremely important. One of the projects that emerged from this group, the International Law and Liberty Society has been around now for 10 years. They started with, the first group to form was in France, and they had approached the Federalist Society and said, please help us. We want to do something. We need to have people talking. We need to be coordinating and building the networks so that when there are opportunities to change things at all of these levels, we have networks of people who have understood and thought and built trust with one another. And I think that's very much what ILS stands for, and I think that's what the UFM Law and Liberty Circle is to do, is to really engage students, professors, and practicing attorneys in thinking about your craft and your philosophy, and what are the things that you do day to day, and what are the things that you do in relationship to the higher meaning of the law. So it was very exciting. One of the projects that I was very inspired by with the group was they had a recent conference in Europe. The Hungarian chapter and the Italian chapter combined forces and had a conference on the anniversary of the Declaration, 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. And many, many European countries are now balking at this kind of oppressive regime and these rulings coming out of these UN courts. And so they said, well, we'll have a conference on an anniversary, but it was a quite critical conference. And so they were taking on the challenges, not just celebrating that we can have more and more human rights with no costs. And so it was very interesting. We all want more human rights, but how do we actually achieve that in our own places and times? Very important questions. But in general, I think the purpose of the society and the circle here will just be to get you talking. And the law really depends upon talking. If we think about divine law, it emanates from the word, but human law does too. Human law comes from the conversations we have with one another. It's the contestation about our language and how we then settle what is our law. What are the higher law checks on our positive law, normative law, positive law. These kinds of questions are very, very important, and the way that we address them is through conversation. So I'm very pleased to support the effort that our esteemed colleague is working on, and we'll be happy to engage with each of you and get to know and see how these conversations transpire. So I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to support this project. We asked Alan Mendenhall to come down and talk to you about the Federalist Society in the United States, out of which the international group has grown. They're different organizations, but they're very tightly linked. And so Alan's here. Alan is Associate Dean at the Business School at Troy University in Alabama. We've worked together on many, many projects through other organizations. He's not a practicing attorney. He was a practicing attorney, but he is an attorney. And he is now working on lots of topics with students and the sort of intersections of law and economics at Troy. And he's very involved with the Federalist Society in running the Montgomery, Alabama chapter, which we think is probably the most active chapter in the United States on a consistent basis. So he's here to coach us on how to get one another talking. So Alan, it's all over to you now. Thank you.
You probably go here every day and just get used to it and start taking it for granted. But for someone like me who leaves and comes back, this is a very magical place. But my path to the Federal Society is different from many of my colleagues. I was actually on the left as an undergraduate. I grew up in a conservative household, in a conservative community, and then went to college and studied literature and fell under the spell of my faculty and sort of drifted left and couldn't decide my senior year whether I wanted to go to law school to become a lawyer or to go on and get a PhD in English and be an English professor. And I'd always liked the idea of being a lawyer because my grandfather was from Monroeville, Alabama, which is where the author Harper Lee is from, and she, of course, authored the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, and my grandfather grew up with Harper Lee and called her Nell by her nickname. And I always thought Atticus Finch was such a striking icon and striking symbol, very inspiring. But I also liked literature, which also has to do with To Kill a Mockingbird, and I liked teaching. So I decided I would move to Japan and take some time off. Not take some time off, I would teach in Japan, but take some time off from my decision whether to go to law school or to get a PhD in English. And while I was there, I started reading things on the internet, and I found Mises and Hayek, and I realized, oh, everything I thought I was promoting to do good for people is actually undermining them. And I started changing my thinking, and interestingly enough, I also found Russell Kirk during that time. So I started adopting a sort of a conservative version of libertarianism that I kind of hold today. But I thought I was on the left as an undergraduate because my first day of college was 9/11, and I walked out of my philosophy class, and somebody said something about planes striking the World Trade Center, and I admit I was somewhat ignorant then. I said, well, I wasn't entirely sure what the World Trade Center was. I just knew it was something really important in New York City, and then I went back to my dorm room and saw the planes striking. The second plane hit the tower and people jumping to their deaths, and that was a really profound way to start college for your first day of class. It made me sort of more interested in ideas at a young age. When I got to law school, I was already, as I say, starting to read Mises and Hayek, starting to think a little bit differently. But of course, your curriculum as a 1L is all contracts, property, civil procedure. Nothing at least at first, it seems like it has a lot of philosophical depth, although it does have a ton of philosophical depth. But our law school lacked a Federal Society chapter. And of course, at this point, Federal Society chapters were becoming more and more common on law school campuses. The Federal Society was founded in 1982 at Ivy League colleges. And so it sort of spread from the elite out. And it was founded because students felt that there were no conservative and libertarian voices on law school campuses at those elite institutions. And after they were founded, it turns out people tried to kind of mimic the Ivy League law school model. Like conservatives at other schools said, "Wow, there's this sort of very elite, very polished, very sophisticated version of conservatism that's coming out, and we've got highly credentialed conservatives that previously got no attention, but now they have a platform, and now they have an organization that speaks for them and for whom they can speak." And the network began to grow quite rapidly. And during the 1980s, the conservative legal movement was still reacting to the Warren Court from the 60s and sort of what they then referred to as an activist judiciary, and judges that were taking it upon themselves to essentially command law, to announce law, rather than to purely interpret law. And the theories of originalism and textualism began to emerge. Now, at the beginning, they were still somewhat unsophisticated, because in the 80s you would see people refer to the original intent of a legislature. Well, a legislative body consists of numerous people with multiple viewpoints who are voting in a particular way for different reasons. So it's actually a fiction to presume that a legislative body has some sort of homogeneous single intent. And realizing this, the analysis began to shift to original public meaning. What is the original public meaning of the words as enacted by the legislature? And this is important for two reasons. Number one, it does strike it as a very big, broad philosophical issue, the separation of powers. It is the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is and not what it should be. The judges are not legislators. They are not elected in the same way legislators are, although in my state of Alabama, the state judges are elected. But they're also not accountable in the way a legislature is. The other reason it's important is actually democracy. It's interesting, in the left in the United States, you hear a lot of people saying, oh, democracy is democracy's in danger and this, but the left wasn't the movement that supported originalism. And why is originalism and textualism, why are originalism and textualism democratic? Well, it's because when we go through the process of passing a law, a lot of social and political capital gets put into that process. And we want to know that when a law is enacted, it will be the law 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road. We want to have confidence that the laws that we pass mean something in the future. That's the whole point in passing them, that they actually will withstand criticism and they'll actually be the law, and that the only way to change them is through the lawful mechanisms of the legislative process. We don't want unaccountable judges coming in and changing the law. Now, they can strike down a law if it's unconstitutional, and that would send it back to the legislature for some corrective action. But we don't want judges legislating themselves, because that would break down the democratic process and also the separation of powers. The Federal Society has grown significantly. It has about 90,000 members in the United States. And this is between students, faculty, lawyers, and judges, and just members of the public. Anybody can join the Federal Society. You don't have to be a lawyer. Most people who join have some interest in the law, but the Federal Society will take your dues if you want to join. They will take your money. But when the Federal Society was first coming about, people were hesitant to put it on your resume. In fact, even when I was in law school, professors would say, you don't put the Federal Society on your resume, because an employer might look at that and think, oh, we don't want to hire him. Well, now it's different. Now, if there's a Republican administration and you want to be nominated to the federal bench, it's basically a prerequisite that you are a member of the Federal Society. No Republican president is going to give you any consideration unless you have some ties to the Federal Society. The Federal Society has sort of informally vetted candidates. So, for example, I mentioned that I'm president of the Montgomery chapter. I've been running the Montgomery chapter since June of 2013, so over 11 years. And during the last Republican administration, we had vacancies on the 11th Circuit and the Middle District, and I got calls from the White House, and they said, look, these are the names we're considering. In particular, I got calls from the White House, but also from the Department of Justice. There's somebody in the Department of Justice who's tasked with vetting candidates. And they say, look, these are the names we got from your area. One says he's a member of the Federal Society, but the Federal Society National doesn't know him. Has he been showing up to your meetings? Do you know this person? And I said, nope, he's not. He doesn't come to any of our meetings. I don't think, he may have paid dues at some point, but he's not involved at all. And that person was not chosen. But guess who was chosen? My vice president. The vice president of my chapter was chosen to fill the seat in the Middle District of Alabama. And after 6 months, he was a young guy, he was 37, 38 at the time, he was chosen to fill the 11th Circuit vacancy. So it was kind of bang, bang. It was a very big moment for our chapter. But ultimately, the Federal Society is about building networks and bringing people together. The Federal Society actually does not take policy positions. And what the Federal Society does well is bring people together for public debate and discourse. So if you go to the National Lawyers Convention, which is held in DC every November, you'll notice that every panel will have conservatives, but they'll also have somebody from the left, because they want to keep the panel honest and they want to make sure that every view is represented, because that just fine-tunes our own arguments. It doesn't really help to get in a room where we just have an echo chamber and we just affirm what it is that we already believe. That doesn't actually improve our arguments. It doesn't really do much for us intellectually. So it's really important that we do have competing viewpoints on display at those meetings. And the people that are represented up there, they don't just pick somebody that they could beat down. That's not the point. They pick the smartest people, the people from Yale and Harvard Law School, people who have been solicitors general of their state or attorneys general, like very intelligent judges. And this is all towards the improvement of the intellectual climate in the judiciary, in the legal field in the United States. I'm excited because I know the Federal Society has now advanced to these international chapters. And they're called law and liberty chapters because they have to be legally distinct from the Federalist Society. But there are chapters in London, Oxford, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, Milan, Munich, Budapest, Warsaw, Sydney, Manila. There's so many chapters now, and they're all over the place. But what I was telling some folks last night is the difference here is that this chapter fits this organization fits the identity of UFM so well, and none of those other cities have a UFM. And so Madrid, that's right. Madrid has a UFM, quite literally has a UFM campus. That's true. But the opportunities here are fantastic to cultivate that sort of network. And when I look at what the Federalist Society has done in terms of influence on the legal culture in the United States, it's astounding. More than any other organization on the right, more than any other think tank that produces policy papers, that goes out and lobbies, and the Federalist Society has done way more than any of those without producing policy papers, without lobbying, without even taking policy positions, simply by building a network. When Justice Elena Kagan had her confirmation hearing in 2010, she said, "We're all originalists now." Well, that would have been an outrageous statement even just 10, 20 years beforehand. When Ketanji Brown Jackson had her hearings in 2022, she professed to being originalist in her methods. This is astounding that even judges on the left have realized, okay, on the hermeneutical space and the jurisprudential space, we have to be textualists and originalists. Now, there are several varieties of these schools now, and the left is now trying to cultivate its own sort of versions of originalism and do it their own way. But at least they're confined by that methodology, which is a very limiting methodology. It constrains judges. And I think the fact that 6 of our 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices were members of the Federalist Society speaks volumes of the influence of this organization. And the fact that the Federalist Society is now expanding internationally is exciting to me as well. So I am hopeful for you. I'm excited for you. I think this could bring opportunities not just to your legal culture, not just to UFM, but to society writ large and to the whole country of Guatemala. So thank you for allowing me to be here to see this launch.
Bueno, tenemos la parte como más de preguntas y respuestas, o de ideas, de sugerencias, de preguntas, de cuestionamientos, que creo que nutren mucho lo que puede ser nuestro círculo, ¿no? Así que, ¿quién se anima?
We can say that the circle already exists in UFM, so it's ready.
Yeah.
So what do we need to join?
Well, I think the circle would create its own sort of membership. So I'm glad you asked that. These are different because they're not the Federalist Society itself. They create their own membership, and you do what you want. You create your own funding pool, and you create your own treasury. So our chapter has we have a treasurer, we have a vice president, we have a secretary, and then we have me, and the others tend to rotate quite regularly. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, which has a lot of government attorneys because we're in the state capital, whereas the Birmingham chapter, which Birmingham's a big financial center, it's a metropolis, it's got a lot of business. Their chapter is full of more private practitioners. But we just have our own, dues that you pay separately from the Federalist Society National. And we meet every single month. We have a lunch every month, although this month we're having an evening program, and we're doing it on IVF and the law, and we're going to have some doctors and some law professors serve on a panel. But you can sort of make your own chapter however you wish. I mean, our chapter meets every month. I think we're the only chapter in the United States that meets every month. I think most of the chapters meet 4, 5, 6 times a year. But I found that meeting every month is great. Number one, we have to get CLE credits for the Alabama State Bar, continuing legal education credits. And you have to get 12 hours, and each lunch is an hour. So if you go to every lunch every month, you get all your CLE credits. But yeah, you have the group of attorneys, and you make it sort of however you want, and you bring in speakers that fit the interest of your particular community. We try to mix up our speakers quite a bit. Sometimes we'll have local judges, sometimes we'll have national speakers. We bring in a lot of national people. We pay them $1,500 to come in, and we pay their travel if it's a national speaker. And if it's a local speaker, we don't pay them anything, because they're just our local people. And it's an honor and a privilege for them to get in front of our group, because we're attorneys, and attorneys are pretty prominent people in the community. So in particular, anybody that holds office wants to come speak to our group, and because they want that audience. I hope that's helpful.
Como decía Alan, vamos a tener una página web donde vamos a tener esos requisitos, y la idea es que tengamos la primera fase un poco explorando para el año que viene debates permanentes cada mes, y una de las cosas que nos puede apoyar mucho a ellos es, bueno, lo que vamos a hacer, traer speakers para acá como Alan y debatir y leer libros, y además de eso otro tipo de debates ya más, conocer un poco qué está haciendo la judicatura, pero siempre en todas las áreas del derecho. Entonces no hay una línea específica sobre la cual vamos, pero también estamos viendo que es importante también conocer estos debates de la jurisprudencia americana, ¿no? Y cómo influyen en el ideario de la amarro, que son cosas que seguramente ustedes sí conocen, pero la judicatura no. Entonces eso es uno de los retos quizás más importantes.
Thank you. I just want to say congratulations. This is a great effort, for real. Yesterday, after afternoon, when you guys were speaking, I went home and said, well, this is something that we were needing, actually, not only I'm speaking as a professor and as a professional, I'm a practicing attorney. I think once you get out of law school, you don't have this space to speak. And I've spoken with my students, like, we're missing the space to discuss the ideas of liberty after we graduate from law school. So this is a great space. Congratulations, you guys. I hope you make it big. Thank you.
The best thing about being the president of the Montgomery chapter, it's the only chance I get in a room full of judges to tell them, all right, be quiet, because we're about to start. So
I was just thinking about an idea. As a law school, we have lots of students going into their LLMs, and I remember my LLM experience. There was a Federalist Society. I went up to them and they were super surprised a girl from Guatemala was conservative. And I just think it's a huge opportunity to network within those alumni and have them connect with that society wherever their LLM takes them.
Yeah, I mean, in particular, I think there would be opportunities. I can imagine organizations in the United States wanting to hire LLMs to work in sort of this Western Hemisphere Spanish-speaking space. I think there would be long-term partnerships. I think a lot of public interest law firms and think tanks in that sort of world would be very interested, and somebody with a law degree from UFM that has an American LLM who's working in the world of ideas. I hadn't quite thought about that until just now, but now that you mention it, I would think that there'd be several think tanks that would be the perfect profile for them.
Why not Japan too, in the East? So I think it's not only seeing towards the north, but taking advantage of meeting people from the rest of the world. I think it's useful for everyone.
I completely agree. Because of technology, there are interesting opportunities to mobilize in ways there weren't before. Of course, you have a situation like in Brazil where X is just going to get shut down. But before it got shut down, there were plenty of opportunities for conservatives, libertarians in that region to connect with conservative and libertarians in other regions. I know several Brazilians that came to the Mises Institute and did stuff at the Mises Institute, and there's a Mises Institute Brazil. And I think politics are changing in a way where, of course, we've got a lot more populist nationalism, but there's also an opportunity for people to communicate and to share ideas across borders in ways that humans never been able to do before. I mean, we live in an extraordinary time. I mean, we take it for granted, but it's pretty awesome what we get to do that no one else has done before. No human ever could have imagined picking this up and having access to every single book that was ever written in any language and being able to communicate with anybody on the planet if you have their contact. It's extraordinary. So who knows what we'll be able to do in the next 40 years. I mean, think about how much the Federalist Society has accomplished in the United States since 1982. I mean, how much more can be accomplished when that span of time goes by again? I mean, the possibilities are really endless.
I want to follow up that comment just a little bit by reflecting on the nature of some of the groups that I saw and the organizers of the groups. The French began, and that was two young attorneys, and they have a radio show. And they are also starting to do some public interest law work in France, which is unusual. The United States has a robust public interest law industry, I guess we could call it. There are many, many organizations that are, suing and trying to sue, and because our common law system encourages that. It's different system. But even in France, they're seeing some opportunities and openings to bring cases that will help clarify law. So the French are especially working on that. In Italy, it was two law professors. In Germany, it's a young man who's reminds me a lot of this one, who's quite intellectual and reads voluminously, and is fighting an uphill German legal culture in a way, but by doing so, by publishing books. So what I noticed with all of these societies are very different. What they had in common is the ones that were successful were the ones where the energy was. The energy and the vision, the passion for the law, and the passion for the context in their country, and this recognition that they have to ally across international boundaries these days. It's imperative in this world. And we're seeing countries, close themselves off behind these tariff walls. And we see the United States moving in this direction. We see really different problems around immigration. And these are conditions that affect us all. So what I really observed is the energy is what's needed. Jesus Maria will need your energy and your help. I would also kind of think about, how many of you would be willing to come, and what's the right cadence for a lawyer's breakfast like this? Is it once a quarter? Is it once a month? How often would you like to get together and talk about a topic and suggest a topic or have a speaker? The students will have to meet on a different cadence, hopefully monthly, and it'll be in the afternoon probably, because that's when they have their space. And hopefully we'll be conducting a few events that get all the groups together so that you're interacting with students and professors. And that's the idea. So I encourage you to just bring the energy and help him decide what this group can mean to you, because it really is about how you converse with one another and then how you build those arms out to other groups. And this can be a great connector, or it can sit here and be just a quiet, insular thing, but it's up to the energy.
Solo agregando a lo que dice la vicerrectora en español. Ayer yo decía que lo que se me parece el UFM Law Liberty Circle es que pudiéramos nosotros rescatar el espíritu de esos espíritus rebeldes que hicieron posible el amarro. ¿Cómo se creó el amarro? Con unos espíritus rebeldes, como dice Manuel Ayao, en el CES, y claro, ya estamos sentados aquí viendo esta maravilla de edificio y todo lo que ha hecho la UFM en 50 años. Bueno, y hemos hecho mucho en economía, en finanzas, pero el derecho, todos son abogados aquí, la mayoría. Los que no, les felicito, pero todos son abogados, ¿no? Pero el derecho está muy alejado de las preocupaciones, aún admitiendo que es uno de los problemas graves que tiene América Latina. Entonces, si en Estados Unidos, como decía Allen, reaccionando a la Warren Court, al activismo, un grupo de gente en Harvard creó este grupo en 1982 y hoy son la organización más influyente en los Estados Unidos, pero por mucho, como ha dicho Allen, ¿no? Nosotros pudiéramos de alguna forma imitar aquellas cosas que se hacen bien. Entonces sí se necesita, como decía Allen y Lenore, entusiasmo, ¿no? Espíritu de asociación, debate, ¿no? Discusión y sobre todo analizar las cosas que de alguna forma están pasando. Por ejemplo, y aquí el UFM Milei Watch, ¿no? Es un observatorio. Es un observatorio, se monitorea en la mar lo que está pasando en otras partes. Eso es un observatorio. Y ese proyecto nos da una pista desde el punto de vista académico de qué es lo que está pasando con ciertas reformas liberales, bien sea en el derecho o en la política o en la economía. Aquí, en el caso del UFM Law Liberty Circle, lo que nos interesa es esa discusión teórica sobre lo que está de alguna forma pasando. Y no podemos negar, como decía Freddy ahorita, que también se necesitan esos contactos con los que están también en el mundo real. Y yo tengo ya muchos años sin práctica jurídica, solo consultorías y ese tipo de cosas, pero muchos de ustedes sí practican el derecho. Entonces, y siempre hay que tener esa conexión entre lo que se hace en las aulas y lo que se hace en la práctica, y lo que hacen los jueces, y lo que dicen los fiscales. Entonces, esa temperatura creo que la tiene muy bien medida en Federalist, porque permite conocer el derecho en su totalidad. You know, William F. Pryor, he wrote an article about the Judge Pryor. He wrote an article about the originalism of Hayek, for example. It's amazing.
Judge Pryor is probably, well, I'm 100% sure. Judge Pryor is the only judge in the United States who is published in the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics.
For example.
Esta iniciativa o esta relación con la Federalist Society nació, estaba yo tratando de acordarme exactamente cuándo, alrededor del 2007, 2008, con una visita que hicimos Giancarlo y yo en Washington al capítulo que tenían ahí en Washington, y desde entonces empezamos a madurar la idea de qué podíamos hacer en la U con la Federalist Society. Luego fuimos juntos con Giancarlo una vez en la Florida y luego fui yo otra vez a la Florida para ver cómo funcionaba, qué funcionaba y ver qué tanto se asemeja a lo que hacemos en la universidad. Parte de lo que vimos es ese orden espontáneo. O sea, no hay un registro, no hay un formalismo de que nosotros los abogados estamos metidos, sino todo lo contrario, va generándose y va surgiendo como un orden espontáneo, va siendo el mismo grupo el que va generando las dinámicas y las dinámicas que ese grupo quiere tomar. Como bien dijo Alan, no hay papers, o sea, para uno de académico llegar a un lugar donde no haya presentación de papers es poco usual, hay mucho diálogo. Y justo en esos años empezábamos el diálogo socrático en la U, la transformación de las aulas al diálogo socrático, y eso ha ido evolucionando. Y esto es parte de eso, es parte de ese diálogo. Y lo que es más increíble es la influencia que ha tenido sin ser lobistas y sin estar publicando, simplemente reuniéndose y discutiendo. Creemos que el momento en Guatemala, sobre todo el momento legal, ha llegado para tener este tipo de diálogo constante, y el número de graduados y de alumnos ya de la universidad ya es lo suficientemente grande para poder mantener este diálogo abierto. Entonces, por eso fue que dijimos, bueno, las cosas se van dando cuando se tienen que dar, y tal vez este sea el momento para poder iniciar este tipo de asociación, club, de como le querramos llamar, dentro de la universidad. Entonces, ¿qué queremos? Ya para ser más concreto, por ejemplo, hoy todos oímos por ahí que la ley de aguas, que si sí, que si no, que qué hacemos, que si existe, que si no existe, que si ya está regulado, que si no está regulado, pero nosotros mismos como abogados, como conocedores de la ley, desconocemos muchos detalles, la historia de la ley de aguas, de la tenencia del agua en Guatemala, etcétera. Entonces, el primero que queremos organizar va a ser alrededor de la ley de aguas, y va a ser simplemente una discusión, no va a ser más allá, no pretendemos más allá, sino simplemente que discutamos y que conozcamos la historia del derecho y la reglamentación del agua en Guatemala y las diferentes propuestas que hay y las consecuencias que podrían tener. La otra que tenemos en el tintero es la ley de competencia. O sea, poder platicar acerca de la ley de competencia. No se trata de imponer nada, simplemente de dialogar alrededor de él para que poco a poco vayamos todos conociendo los diferentes pensamientos y las diferentes corrientes que se encuentran entre los diferentes movimientos y propuestas de ley que hay en el Congreso. Y conocer un poco más de qué hace el organismo judicial, cómo hace el organismo judicial para llegar a esas sentencias, qué podemos nosotros colaborar o cómo podemos nosotros ayudar a que mejore el organismo judicial, porque todos nos quejamos como abogados, pero ¿qué hacemos? Entonces, conversando, poco a poco, conociendo un poco más lo que se hace, poder irnos empapando y poder ir proponiendo soluciones y ayudando a que la justicia en Guatemala pues cada día mejore. Ese es el propósito de este tipo de círculo, ya que así le llaman, y vamos a ser los que querramos pertenecer, los que vamos a decir cuándo reunirnos, qué temas tratar y cómo financiarnos. Aquí no es un fundraising. Nos gustó que la Federalist Society no da donaciones, o sea, no podemos pretender una donación. Sí colabora, como bien dijo Alan, si nosotros queremos invitar a alguno de estos profesores, ellos colaboran con el pasaje, con el hotel, muchas veces de estos profesores, pero es una colaboración. No hay una donación hacia la institución, no hay nada, sino ellos simplemente le pagan a esta persona su pasaje y su estadía, y ya somos nosotros los que organizamos aquí qué hacer. O sea, no hay tampoco una actividad de fundraising ni se sientan amenazados que el venirse a sentar aquí les va a costar X cantidad de dinero, no. Simplemente dependiendo las actividades que hagamos, pues vamos a ir colectando lo que se necesite para poderlas realizar. La universidad está dispuesta a prestar el espacio para que nos podamos reunir periódicamente. Hay diferentes espacios en la universidad, todos ustedes lo conocen, depende de la actividad que querramos hacer, pues así será el espacio que se utilice dentro de la universidad para poder facilitar este diálogo. O sea, ese es el propósito, que dialoguemos y que invitemos también a algunos no abogados, que no monopolicemos el círculo, sino que tengamos también otras voces y otras opiniones que pueden ser muy interesantes, porque muchas veces lo que afecta a una ley o lo que afecta a un derecho tiene repercusiones políticas, económicas, hasta psicológicas. Entonces, el poder oír a diferentes profesionales en su campo, qué ven ellos en las diferentes leyes, es muy interesante. Entonces, ese es el propósito. El propósito, como bien dijo Jesús María, y el inicio es el mismo que nació en el 58 con el CES, un grupo de curiosos que querían conocer un poquito más de las ideas de la libertad y empezaron a reunirse sin mayor formalismo. O sea, cuando uno como abogado se topa con los estatutos del CES, a veces no lo puede creer que tenga tantos años, o no, Fausto. Y entonces dice uno, bueno, ¿y aquí qué? ¿Verdad? Es de lo más simple que hay y lleva años funcionando. O sea, es un ejemplo de que muchas veces nosotros complicamos este tipo de asociaciones. Es ese diálogo. Eso es lo que queremos iniciar, un diálogo con un tema enfocado, la ley y la libertad. Eso es lo que se trata y eso es lo que se inicia el día de ayer oficialmente y hoy con este primer desayuno, que podemos decir es la primera reunión ya del capítulo de Guatemala, para que vayamos conociendo un poquito más de esa norma. Y yo quiero agradecerle especialmente a Lenore y a Jesús María, porque fueron ellos los que hicieron el trabajito de hormiga que muchas veces se necesita para poder estar hoy aquí. Si no hay quienes ejecuten y hagan las cosas a veces se quedan en el aire. O sea que, thank you, Lenore, thank you, Jesús María. Entonces, para ya llegar a cosas concretas, quería hacer una propuesta, que Jesús María quede como el coordinador del grupo y a Andrés Weil como el secretario del grupo, No es un secretario que va a tener que levantar el acta y la tenemos que revisar y firmar, sino simplemente para que tengamos a quienes poder nosotros contactar y ellos puedan empezar a organizar los diferentes eventos. Entonces vamos a organizar, Jesús María, el primero ya con el tema de la ley de agua y espero lo disfruten, porque de eso se trata, de conocer y disfrutar este tipo de diálogos y de conversaciones. O sea, una vez más, muchas gracias.